And joining us now on the line from Queen's University in Kingston, David Gordon from the School of Urban and Regional Planning. Hi, David. How are you tonight?
I'm just fine.
Let us rethink suburbia, shall we, for the next few minutes? According to the 2006 census, 85% of Ontarians live in urban areas. And I want to know, first of all, whether you think that really accurately reflects how truly urban we are.
Well, I don't think it reflects it well at all. All that means is that 15% of us live in rural areas. That way over half of Ontarians live in what nobody would deny is anything but a suburb. For example, in Toronto, more people live in the 905 than the 416 area code. In Ottawa, more people live outside the Greenbelt than inside. Suburban life, we're a suburban nation. Suburban life is the norm for most Canadians, and it's the fastest growing segment. So we've got to learn to do this better.
Okay, we tend to think of suburban life as being, well, the first word that comes to mind for most people, I suspect, is sprawl. But that is changing, and now there's a new phrase we hear, new urbanism. What is that?
Well, it's a largely American movement for mixed-use, walkable, well-designed communities. In Canada, we just call it good urbanism. We've been doing this very well in the inner cities. In Toronto, for example, I took tours of the St. Lawrence neighborhood around the St. Lawrence Market when the Congress for New Urbanism was here a few years ago. In Montreal, the new Benny Farm redevelopment. In Vancouver, the area around False Creek. We do urban new urbanism very well. What's the breakthrough or a useful thing that's come out of this was the idea that you could take these great designs and do it in suburban areas. And that's where we mostly hear about new urbanism in
Can
Canada.
you do that, David? If the suburbs have been built in such a sprawling fashion, can you actually take what's already there and convert it to new urbanism?
No, it's not about retrofitting the existing suburbs. It's about the new suburbs being built on green fields, being built in a manner that's better than our conventional practice and better than some of the alternatives. It's pretty frightening, some of the things I've been seeing in touring the United States. There's a big trend to what they call gated communities. We're starting to see those in Canada. Way too much big box retail, way too much travel by automobile, and the cars are getting bigger. And the conventional suburbs are getting denser, but the you know, you've heard about the garage doors and garages popping out the front of the houses, so that a lot of the higher density conventional suburbs, all you see when you walk down the street is a row of garage doors. So we can do better than this.
How much of this new urbanism is inspired by what's, I guess, thought to be a European culture or tradition?
The new urbanists talk about European ideas, and certainly there's some good work being done in Europe. I'm particularly fond of, believe it or not, Prince Charles' work in an extension of Dorchester called Poundbury. Has turned out very well. And then, you know, the urban ideas for new urbanism invoke some of the best work that's being done in Barcelona or in Berlin. But in North America, we take a lot of our ideas from the best of the pre-World War II suburbs, the suburbs before the automobile began to dominate our lives. So in Canada, we'd look at places like the town of Mount Royal in Montreal, or Leaside, perhaps in Toronto, Lindenlea in Ottawa, and the better of the, you know, turn of the century neighborhoods.
Let's just go about a half an hour north of this studio right now and talk about Markham. Now, Markham is one of those 905 communities that people think of, I suspect, in a certain way, but they are, I gather, in the midst of a, what is it, $3 billion ambitious redesign of what's going on up there. Tell us what's happening.
Well, I'm quite impressed by what they've been trying to do. And we take our students every year to Markham and to Don Mills to look at best practices in suburban development. They did some very good environmental planning at first, and to figure out where are the areas that need to be preserved, and have done a fine job on preserving the Rouge Valley. Then, in the areas in between, they asked themselves, how can we not use up as much farmland and not sprawl as much as the stuff we built in the 70s and the 80s? And they invited up a visionary architect planner from Miami called Andres Duaney and his wife Elizabeth Plater-Zyberg to show some ideas they had there that became known as the New Urbanism. They adopted that, and they've managed to get projects which are about twice the density of the stuff from the 70s and 80s. And that's pretty impressive.
Well, I think people are fairly familiar with the notion of a downtown in the suburbs. Scarborough has a downtown, Mississauga has a downtown, North York, I guess the first one, the uptown downtown they used to call it, varying degrees of success with all of those things. How, as we were just showing some images while you were talking of what the plans for Markham are going to be, how would Markham's new downtown differ from those three existing ones?
Well, Markham's new downtown is built more with a grid of streets rather than crescents. And from the beginning, they're trying to get decent transit in, and it's a bus transit at the moment. They're also trying to have very well-designed public spaces built in from the beginning, and apartments over top of retail. It's one of the hardest things to do, to build a suburban downtown.
Well, the suburbs, of course, were originally designed for the car, but this new downtown Markham City Centre is primarily designed for what?
Well, you design first for good walking, good cycling, good public transit, but of course you're going to accommodate the car. The car is a wonderful appliance. It's one of the very best appliances designed for the first half of the 20th century. Most people who own a own a home are going to own one of these appliances. But the trick is to design your community so that you don't need the car to do everything.
Okay, I've heard cars described a lot of ways, but never before as an appliance. Why do you call it an appliance?
It's just a lovely gadget to have. It does a lot of things usefully. You don't necessarily have to think of it as an evil device. I lived mostly in urban areas myself through all my career, walk and cycle to work, but I've almost always had an automobile. It's handy for getting to the cottage. Every couple of weeks we go up to a supermarket to get things we can't get at the farmer's market, take my daughter and her teammates off to soccer games. It's a lovely device to have, personal transportation and mobility. But you can't design a city of 5 million around everybody using it for everything.
All right, having said that, if the new Markham downtown is not going to be, if it's going to be more friendly for people to walk or to cycle, roller skate, rollerblade, whatever, will it be anti-car?
It's not a case of making it anti-car. It's a case of designing for pedestrians, cyclists, and transit first, and then accommodating the car. The Markham downtown is only a short hop from the Highway 407. It's going to be very convenient to have a car there, perhaps a little too convenient. I think the best thing to do, we think about Gil Penaloza, who's from Bogota, talks about making transportation options work for the 880, for an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old. Can your 8-year-old kid walk to a corner store and spend their allowance? Can your 80-year-old mother get around after she loses her license to do the kinds of things that you need to do on a daily basis? If your transportation system's designed right, it works for the 8 and the 80, and also for people who have cars.
Now, we've seen some pictures of this as you've been talking, but I wonder if you could sort of flesh out the details a little bit more. What are we going to see there when this is all said and done many, many years down the road?
Yeah, it's going to take about 10 years, I would guess, from here, but you're going to see, I hope, a main shopping area with apartments above it. You're going to see in behind that some townhouses and stacked townhouses, nice places to walk, broad sidewalks. You don't always have sidewalks in the suburbs. Streets with trees planted on them, corner stores, garages in behind, so you don't have whole streetscapes of garages, maybe some back alleys, which work pretty well. You're going to see different types of houses, not just all one type, apartments in one area and single houses in another, but you might have a village square with townhouses and singles and semi-detached and some low-rise apartments all around this one square, mixed up. And then a few blocks away, maybe some places to work, so that some people could walk to work.
I gather part of the plan as well is to put the transit line right across the middle of Highway 7, which is the east-west thoroughfare there. Not 407, just for those outside Toronto, not 407, which is a toll highway, but Highway 7, which is a free, I guess, you know, it's a huge boulevard actually is what it is, more than a super highway.
Yeah, it's
What's the significance of doing transit that way?
It's an old 2-lane provincial highway, and they don't need it anymore because they built the 4-lane one parallel to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very ambitious and interesting idea. You turn it, instead of into a highway, into a European boulevard. The kind of things that you'd see in Paris and Barcelona. Can carry some traffic, but it also would have a streetcar line up the middle of it, trees, and buildings that come right up to the edge rather than set way back behind parking lots.
I see. David, one last thing, and that is, you know, these new urbanist principles that we're talking about, we're referring to the suburbs, but are they also applicable to much more intensified downtowns, for example, as well?
Yes, we just don't call it new urbanism there. We just call it in Canada good urbanism. And there are fine examples of this being done in places in Vancouver and Calgary and Montreal. My favorite, I lived in the St. Lawrence neighborhood in downtown Toronto for a decade, and that's a perfect example of what people in new urbanism are looking for.
Yep, that's a nice neighborhood. David Gordon, it's good of you to join us on the line from Queen's University. Thanks so much.
Our pleasure.